Alright, this is a crash course into printmaking. So let's start with what you're going to need. So you'll need a piece of acrylic or picture frame glass. You'll need an ink knife, a brayer, which is what you're going to roll the ink out with. You'll also need your ink. I've just got a small container here, so I'm also going to use this wood stick. I think it has a correct name, but I can't think of it. I'm going to use that to get the ink out with. And then you're also going to need your block. So to get started, you're going to get your ink out onto your piece of glass or acrylic. And I usually just spread it in a single diagonal line. You won't really know how much you need until you really get a feel for it, so that's what the ink knife is going to come in handy for. So once you get your diagonal line of ink rolled out, you'll use your brayer and just work it into a square. So just keep rolling the ink back and forth until you've got it complete coverage across that square. And you'll notice here I can tell I've got too much ink, meaning my brayer is just kind of like slipping around and not really rolling. So I'm going to use the ink knife to pull off some of that ink and then continue to work the ink around with my brayer. Once you've got it good and inked up, you're ready to transfer that ink to your block. And this is just kind of a repetitive process here, so you'll work by adding more ink to your brayer and then transferring it to your block, and then just continue on like that. The first inking of the block is going to take a lot more ink just because you're priming it. So a lot of times my first print is going to be very light, or I will use, I'll consider it a test print, you might say. So to make a print without a press, you'll just grab your sheet of paper, you'll lay it on top of your block. You can turn it over and stamp it, but when it gets to be bigger, it's a lot easier to control the paper. And then you can just work it with your hands, or if you have a wooden spoon, you can use the back of a wooden spoon. For something this small, my hands are fine and I can just work it around and feel where the block is. Make sure you hold the paper while you're pressing it, just so it doesn't move. You can see I've always got 2 fingers on it at different points, just to make sure that even though I'm pressing it into the block, it's not moving. And voila, you have your print. When it comes time to clean up, there's a few extra supplies you'll need. I've got a container of cooking oil, just regular old canola oil, and a rag. Now you can see my rag's already pretty dirty, so I'm trying to find a good spot that isn't full of ink already. So you're just going to dip that rag in your canola oil and just work that into the ink on your block. The oil acts as a way to just like pick up the ink, since it is a soy-based ink is what I'm working with here. And then we'll use a different part of the rag to pull off some of that oil and ink. And that block is ready to be cleaned up more. For the next step, you want to take as much excess ink off the inking palette as possible, so I'm going to use that ink knife to scrape it all off, and then I'm going to save this because it's perfectly good ink, so I'm going to put it back into my container. From there, you're going to take your brayer and just do some quick rolls out onto the inking palette. Make sure you get as much ink off of that as possible. You may have to do this a time or two just to get it all off. And then I always keep a sheet of like newsprint underneath my working space so that I can just rub excess ink off onto the newsprint. Alright, once you've got all the extra ink picked up, you can put your ink away and get your rag with oil on it and start to pick up a lot of that ink. The brayer is probably the hardest thing to clean. It It requires a lot of oil and dish soap. You'll see in the next step to get that ink off there. Once you have all the oil picked up with the canola oil in the rag, you can use dish soap, just regular old Dawn dish soap, and coat everything in a little bit of soap. I use an old brush that I have and I just work it into the spaces. So sometimes you can put a little bit of water on it to help it soap up a little more, but really you're just trying to pick up that ink and oil. And then you'll just get that soap on all of the ink, and then once you've got that, take it to the sink or the shower, wherever you have water hose outside, and rinse all your soap off.